Good evening, everybody. My name's Andy Horowitz. That's the last time we'll hear that sound tonight. One more time. There it is. I teach American history and environmental studies here at Tulane, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this culminating event in our series on the Katrina Disaster Now. Before we begin the program, I want to acknowledge how much work has gone into making the series happen. The room is clean, the microphone works, the temperature has been carefully calibrated for your comfort, and in hundreds of other ways, we're reliant on the work of other people to make this happen, and I think tonight of all nights, we shouldn't take for granted all of that work. So I'm grateful to everybody. In particular, I want to recognize that what we're doing tonight and the events we've been doing all semester have been made possible by a generous donation to the School of Liberal Arts and the Environmental Studies program. And that donation is meant to recognize, as I said for those of you who were with us last week, that these things that we call environmental problems are very much human problems. We're grateful to Carol Haber, the Dean of the School of Liberal Arts, who helped to facilitate that donation, who supports the Environmental Studies program. Grateful to Kathy Jack, who directs the Environmental Studies program, who enabled all of this to happen. My colleague Jana Lippman helped to align the stars so that this event works with the History Department's class on disasters in history. And that is my cue to say that if you have an attendance sheet going around, if you're in that class, you should sign in. If you're not, don't worry, no one is taking your attendance, so you can just keep passing it. Shelley Moe has handled logistics for this entire series in a way that would lead a naive person to believe that it's easy, but we should not be naive. It was not easy. Shelley's a very talented person. I'm not sure where she is right now because she's doing something important that I don't even know about. Thank you, Shelley. We are proud to be co-sponsoring tonight's event with the New Orleans Center for the Gulf South, and the center's new director, Rebecca Snedeker, has contributed enormously to the shape of this program. It wouldn't have happened without her, so thank you. I want to give a special shout out to the students in my class, which is called the Katrina Disaster Now. They have been extending their study of the questions that we've raised in these public programs in our weekly discussions, which have been full of the best kinds of arguments and introspection. And they've taught me so much about these topics, and they have something really important to teach you tonight too, which is how to get to dinner. So here's the point on that. After the more formal presentations tonight, you should follow these students who I'm going to ask to raise their hands in a second across the street to the LBC and upstairs from there to the 1834 Club. The food will be good, but that's not the point. The idea is that the ideas that our speakers are going to share with us deserve more conversation, and what happens in the auditorium tonight is meant to only be half the program. People warned me, they said, if you do an event in Freeman and then try to have dinner in the 1834 Club, nobody will make the walk. Everybody said this was a bad idea. Please prove them wrong, which is the same as proving me right, which is why it's so important to me. Please demonstrate your commitment to redeeming the craving for true human interaction by coming across the street and talking with someone. And to rephrase that into the language of classrooms, I will give you 50 bonus points for taking that short walk, and 50 more if once you get there, you talk to someone you didn't know when you came here. Wouldn't that be great? So if you are a student in my Katrina Disaster Now class and you know where the 1834 Club is, raise your hand, and everybody should look around. They're in the back. If you don't know where that is, you can follow these people. Identify one who will be your lodestar and follow them. Okay. It's across the street in the big glass building, and upstairs there are signs. But please come. Most of all, I want to thank our participants who are sitting here in the front row. We invited them tonight because their experiences and insights inspired us in profound ways, and it was really generous of them to be here with us tonight. They really honor us with their presence, so thank you all for being here. One more thing, just to say that we gave them a prompt that was at once tightly structured and open-ended. We invited these people to reflect on the phrase, the Katrina Disaster Now. That was it. They could talk about how the events of August and September 2005 look now, a decade later. They could talk about subsequent changes, or they could talk about Katrina, whatever the word Katrina means to them, whatever that word summons up for them. They could talk about how Katrina continues to shape their lives and our communities today. I want to be clear that I have no idea what they're going to say, which is why this is interesting. The one rule was that they had to keep their remarks to 5 minutes each so that there was enough time for everybody to speak. It was important to us to include a chorus of voices, even if they aren't in total harmony all the time, because the gathering idea for this event was that there's not just one Katrina story, and it would take many voices to say something significant about it. There are no introductions, but the speakers will follow the order that's on your programs. There's just one change of plans, which is that Carol Bebel couldn't be with us tonight, and she in fact sent a video. So she made the effort, and we are in fact failing right now to be able to make that video work. So there may be a surprise video at her point in the program, or there may be no Carol. But other than that, I think that's it. Our first presenter is Dr. Michael White, so let's make him welcome. Hello?
Good evening. It's a little dry in here. At least that's what my read told me. 5 minutes. Usually, they hold up a sign when you have 5 minutes left. And in case you always wondered from the audience what those signs say, the first sign says 5 minutes, and you keep talking. And the second sign says, time up, and you keep talking. And the next time says, get off the stage, dummy, now. But at any rate, we hope we won't get to that. I have 3 brief things to say. Hurricane Katrina has been an important part of my life for the last 10 years, and it's not something that happened and it's over. It's a continuous process of recovery in different stages, and it's not something that would ever just go away. I wish it would. One of the things is that I am very disturbed by what I see in the city that I grew up in New Orleans. It is a city in transition, and what it is in transition to, we don't exactly know. But for many native locals, things like affordable housing, rent, buying homes remain problems. We have serious issues with mental health, education, and those are just a few things. And I'm very, very concerned that instead of taking advantage of the opportunity to truly rebuild the city in a more balanced way for most of the citizens, I don't see that happening. I see a land grab, I see an economic grab, and a lot of the native locals are being left by the wayside, and that is very disturbing. In music, there have been good things and bad since Katrina. On the good side, there's a lot of music in clubs and music all over the streets, all over the city. There is a continuing national and international interest in New Orleans music of all styles. A couple of weeks ago, I performed in Germany and Belgium. Thank goodness I'm not there now. Musicians from New Orleans tour and travel all the time, and that's a good thing. On the other side is a lot of them have to travel to make a living because the pay is very low in New Orleans, and that's one thing that has not changed. But one thing that did change with the music is many musicians from other parts of the country, not from New Orleans, have moved into the city and promote themselves as New Orleans musicians, and they work very cheap in some clubs, and they travel under the veil of being New Orleans musicians, and they do things that real New Orleans musicians would not do, like sleep 4 and 5 in a room and work cheaper than cheap. And New Orleans musicians are staying home and standing on the corner complaining. But on the other side of that, in every style, major style, whether you're talking about gospel music, traditional New Orleans jazz, New Orleans rhythm, early New Orleans rhythm and blues, or piano styles, you see a lot of people coming in from outside that are paying more stylistic attention to the greatness of this music than the locals are. So in a lot of ways, it's the fault of the locals. The third thing I wanted to mention was Katrina's effect on my personal life 10 years later. Katrina has also been good and bad. It's mostly bad. I lost everything I owned, including a massive archive and valuable materials related to the history of jazz and New Orleans music that could never be replaced. I had known a generation of musicians who were born between the late 1890s and early 1910. I had interviewed a lot of those musicians. I had some of their instruments. I had memorabilia from them. I had thousands of books, CDs, valuable, rare instruments, things that I lost that could never be replaced. I was writing different things about these musicians in jazz history, and those things are gone forever except for what I can remember. Like many New Orleanians, life is very different for me now. I live no longer in a fantasy world because Katrina is always in the back of my mind. I always feel that it can happen again, and I do not have the same view about owning property or possessions that I did before, because I realized that it could all be gone in an instant. But what that does do is it gives you renewed strength and faith. It tests your faith and your strength, and it lets you have the opportunity to focus on things that are more important in life. So that's, in a sense, a good thing. And another good thing for me personally in terms of music, because there were a lot of other bad things. I've lost 60% of my family since Katrina. And that's been a very difficult thing. I feel like, in a way, I've lost 10 years trying to recover, and at the same time dealing with, family tragedies and things like that. But on the good side, my music has gotten deeper, more depth of sound and spirit, and a certain new kind of freedom, where now I try to do things that I never would have thought of before. I discovered by force that I had to break a lot of my old traditional conventions. One of those is buying the same instrument that everybody else buys. Anybody in here ever played clarinet? I guarantee almost everybody had either Selma, LeBlanc, Yamaha, or Buffet. Anyone had anything different from that? No. There you go. I discovered that there are independent makers around the world that are doing things a lot better than those 4 big companies. And I had someone custom make me an instrument that I absolutely love. And when I went to Germany, I was able to go to that company and spend a whole afternoon there looking at instruments and trying out different things. And that's given me a new perspective. And the last thing I'm going to say is that, Katrina destroyed life as I knew it. It destroyed life for many people, thousands of people. But it was like a death. I lost a lot of friends. I lost family. I lost places I used to go. I lost everything I owned. I lost a good bit of myself. But every time there is a death, as the lessons of the jazz funeral teaches, there can also be a transition toward a new and hopefully better existence. So I feel like I have another chance. In a way, I feel like I'm blessed because life sort of started over again. And right now, musically, I'm in a creative phase that I've been in for a long time. Career-wise, things have been good for me, despite the fact that I'm carrying around the legacy of this difficult time with Katrina and really wondering, is it going to happen again? Because, of course, as you probably heard on the news last night, they were talking about the Gulf of Mexico bordering the French Quarter. Well, that sounds crazy, but no, it doesn't. Not really. And so I wonder about the future of the city. I think we're in transition right now in culture, in music, in politics, in economics. We still have a lot of major problems that are being kind of washed over, looked over, swept under the rug, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this city in the next 10, 20 years. So I'm hoping that if any of you, any of us, can do what we can in the areas that we're in to raise a certain level of consciousness and try to do what's right and not just think about money, I'm hoping that that happens. I think New Orleans has been one of the most important cities in the history of man. We've contributed a lot to the world, and I would hate to see it destroyed, whether it be by storm or greed. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Monique Verdin. I am from a place that the locals call down the road, just south of New Orleans. It also, if you look at Louisiana and think of it as being the boot, I'm in like the big toe that's rotting away, like most of South Louisiana's Mississippi River Delta. My family are Houma. They're indigenous people who have lived in this territory for hundreds of years. Katrina I had a friend right after Katrina, Palestinian American, that I took for a ride to my grandmother's house. And so if you've never done this ride before, I highly recommend it. You follow Rampart Street from the back of the French Quarter, which turns into St. Claude Avenue, which turns into St. Bernard Highway, which becomes where I live on Bayou Road. And, it's funny, the places that you know and how they change so quickly, and how there is a natural history that we have forgotten here. The Bayou Terrebonne runs in my front yard, but you would just think that it was a drainage ditch. And I think that my environmental awareness pre-Katrina, I knew the wetlands were going. My cousins who live in a place called Pointe aux Chiens, which means Point of the Oaks, and all of the oaks there are dying because of saltwater intrusion in the Barataria-Terrebonne estuary. And so I had been seeing this happen, and that juxtaposed with another Native and Cajun community where some of my relatives live in a place called Grand Bois, where there are these toxic oil waste pits. So, since the late 90s, I had just gotten out of high school and I came home to South Louisiana, and I started taking pictures and was really moved and horrified by what I was learning about this really beautiful place that was full of this really magical and inspiring culture that for years I had been away from and felt really honored to be reconnected to. And then Katrina came, and this nightmare of toxic waste and water, washing into my cousin's landscape suddenly was in my own backyard in St. Bernard. And here in New Orleans, at that time I was living not too far from here in Carrollton. And luckily the water stopped just, a couple of blocks from where my house was. But there was a shift. So I was doing this documentary work, and what was, me kind of trying to process and looking at my family and the loss of wetlands in this toxic environment and what have you. Suddenly, I was dealing with it myself, and the camera with my collaborator at the time, Mark Krasnoff, turned. And, I was telling the story of, the wetlands and the loss of land and what was happening to the Indians. And, I was the Indian telling that story. And so, it's been the learning process and what Katrina kind of reinforced. Now you hear conversations around the city where people can say, oh yeah, the wetlands are going, but they've never actually gone to those wetlands. And you have communities that, for years now with the Coastal Master Plan, they've said that communities will have to be sacrificed. And just recently in The Advocate, they came out and said, hey, all of the greatest scientists and ecologists and hydrologists and engineers have said that the Mississippi River, the mouth of the Mississippi River, needs to be moved north, and that north is essentially in my backyard. And though we have, billions of dollars that have been put into federal protection, it's not protection, it's risk reduction, according to the Army Corps of Engineers now, these levees, but they say that some of them, the one that surrounds my community, the Chalmette Loop, also known as the Great Wall of St. Bernard, has sunk between 3 and 6 feet. And the reality is that you're either inside levee protection or you're outside levee protection, but we're all kind of in the same boat, because there will be radical restoration or transformation, and we're trying to engineer our ways out of what took Mother Nature 5,000 years to create, and man has, destroyed in 80 years environmentally. I'm looking for a way to kind of close what I'm trying to say, but I guess I've been the bearer of bad news post-Katrina. I started showing my photographs and telling the story of the Houma and telling the story of the land. And I'm to a point now where we're 10 years out, and all of those same fears that we had pre-Katrina and all of those realities and lessons that we learned during and after Katrina, it's all of those, it's all still there. The water is rising, the storms are coming, the petrochemical industry is dictating what's happening here in South Louisiana. And, it is a beautiful, sacred place. I like to tell people that, the Mississippi River Delta is like a PowerPoint for the planet. And at this point in my life, the hope is that we will be able to remember, to preserve, and to protect this beautiful place, even if it's just a little bit. So, thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sandy Rosenthal. I founded the group levees.org after the levees broke in New Orleans and St. Bernard Parish, August 29, 2005. Our organization, levees.org, almost never uses the word Katrina because it confuses the American public. It misleads the people of our country into thinking that what happened in New Orleans on that day and St. Bernard was due to Mother Nature, when in fact it was due to it was a man-made disaster, not a natural disaster. It was man-made on so very many different levels. And human beings are hiding behind all that talk of water and wind. Saying that Katrina flooded New Orleans would be like saying that an iceberg killed all those people on the Titanic 100 years ago. The iceberg exposed human arrogance. The iceberg exposed that a ship was trying to get across the Atlantic with too few lifeboats. The iceberg exposed that the captain was going too fast in treacherous waters. Similarly, 100 years later, a hurricane exposed that there were civil engineering mistakes in the levees. And the humans that did that, that made those mistakes, was our United States Army Corps of Engineers. The breach event was not a shining moment in American civil engineering. However, it was a pivotal linchpin moment in American history. 55% of the American population lives in counties protected by levees. That's the majority. And after this breaching event, changes were made to national policy that changed America as we know it. For example, just a couple of examples are the National Levee Safety Act, reform of the Army Corps of Engineers, and changes in levee building codes. So levees all over this country and actually the entire world are completely different now. These changes were made directly due to the breaching event, August 29, 2005. For the past 10 years, my group, levees.org, has been focused on making sure that everybody knows the vetted facts about this flooding. The victims deserve it and the survivors. It's been 10 years and I'm still mad, but the victims and the survivors deserve this. And levees.org, our group, does this in many ways. We have put up historic plaques at many of the levee breach sites. There's one at the 17th Street Canal in the Lakeview neighborhood, and the Lakeview neighborhood is proud of saying, the Corps, they put the lake in Lakeview. We put a plaque at the London Avenue Canal, and also more recently one at the Industrial Canal that flooded the Lower Ninth Ward. We are working to make sure that several traveling and permanent exhibit museums in the country are accurate, including New York City, Washington, D.C., and Tampa. And closer to home, this past summer, the group levees.org hosted a ribbon-cutting ceremony for an actual levee education park at the London Avenue Canal. It's a park that describes all the breaches, all the levees, and what happened to all the lives. And I highly encourage you to visit it. And now that the cool weather has arrived, it's a great time to go. It's in the Gentilly neighborhood of the Fillmore Gardens, where Mirabeau crosses London Avenue Canal. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy Corrigan, and I'm the Associate Dean of Libraries here at Tulane. And I thought about the question, what does Katrina mean today? And that's a tough question. In the end, I have no idea what Katrina means today. I really think that about all I can say about the meaning of Katrina at this point in time is that it's much more varied, and it becomes more varied over time. And for example, in November of 2005, I think that most of us who are here would say now that there are seem to be a lot fewer nuances about the meaning of Katrina at that point. There's something about 250,000 stinking refrigerators that can really drive a particular point home. Today, the meaning of Katrina probably depends a lot on your connection to it. And the recovery that followed Katrina did some good things, some new jobs and new schools, renovated neighborhoods, a sort of heightened awareness of New Orleans culture. But many people experienced losses, and we can't forget that there were people who lost loved ones and who wanted to return to the city but couldn't. I think the big lesson so many of us learned after Katrina, especially if you were here with a family and children at the time, was that if your stuff disappears, it's really what you have left that's what really matters. This isn't to say that some stuff isn't really important, and that was the special lesson that we learned with our libraries at Tulane after Katrina. When after Katrina, of course, the most of the campus, the uptown campus here, was flooded with water. But in our libraries, especially the main Howard Tilton Library, we had 9 feet of water in the library for 3 weeks, and that whole ground level that is about the size of a football field. And in across the street, or parking lot in Jones Hall, which has our special collections, we had similar flooding. So in the Howard Tilton building, the main building, we had 700,000 volumes, printed volumes, 1.5 million pieces of microform, all of our music recordings, not the general collection recordings, not the jazz archive, but all of them, the general collections one. They were all underwater. In categories, that was a music library, a government documents depository, all of our microfilm collection, some general collections of art, books in the social sciences, and science and engineering. And in Jones Hall, what was flooded was a lot of our manuscript collections. And manuscripts are people's papers, they're personal papers. And by nature, these things are unique, and there aren't other copies of those things. So examples of manuscripts that were flooded would be the personal papers of some very important people in Louisiana history, some governors, some congressional representatives. The Boggs family comes to mind. We had the important papers of a lot of organizations in New Orleans and Louisiana that have had a tremendous impact on people that would, for example, the papers of the Jewish Federation of New Orleans, the Toro Synagogue, the Episcopal Diocese of Louisiana, the Louisiana American Civil Liberties Union, that kind of stuff, those papers. And it was underwater. And so initially what we had to do is we had to drain and kind of stabilize those buildings and stop the mold from taking over, because with these big lakes in the basement and everything closed off and glass buildings, they were like giant petri dishes, and it was kind of a mess. But in the end, we were able to salvage a lot of material. We salvaged a lot of stuff from the Howard Tilton building, but it was so big, and once the water was drained out, that just logistically that was hard to do. With our special collections, we saved everything. Everything that was wet, we salvaged, and we froze it, and we restored it. So after the dust settled a little bit, or things dried out, we built something called the Recovery Center in Mid-City to process all this material that came back, because it didn't jump back on the shelves by itself, and a lot of it just needed to be cataloged as if it were new material. Anyway, so we processed about 1.2 million items back into the collection out at the Recovery Center. And a lot of it was from material we restored. A lot of it was from donations. Some of it was from replacement purchases. But for example, today our music and media collection is 5 times the size of what it was at the time of Katrina. So that was kind of a good thing. But we lost a tremendous amount of other stuff as well. But we did not lose much of the special material, the unique material, and that idea that you don't know what you have until it's gone. I think that I don't get a lot of questions or a sense of wonderment about what's happened at the libraries at Tulane, and I think it's because a lot of it isn't gone, but it took a lot of work to get there. So after after we focused on the collections, we started thinking about the buildings, because the buildings were just wrecked. But we opened them up for you all, the students at Tulane, that returning spring semester. We began a plan to build back the flooded spaces. It took a long time to work with FEMA to help us out on that, but then we started that construction of 2 more floors on the top of the library that you see today. It's almost finished, actually, that big giant building that we built on top of another giant building that happened to be an occupied library that couldn't be closed at the time. That project is almost over, but it's been a long time and a lot of work. Whether there's an easy meaning to all of that, I don't know, but I guess that's the point, is that this has been a lot of work for a lot of people. Not just what we did, but whether it's us or a hospital or a school somewhere, that people were doing that everywhere. And some of them, just like us, are just finishing up as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Casandra Tran. I grew up here in New Orleans, more specifically New Orleans East. So let's do a little geography lesson. New Orleans East is about 30 minutes, 40 minutes away from here. So it's in its own little isolated part of the city. Well, this is the city, New Orleans East. So that being said, the demographic would be, well, we're a majority of people of color that live out there, Vietnamese Americans, African Americans, as well as the emerging Latino community. So a lot of folks who live out there came from the Vietnam War during the fall of 1975. So a lot of these folks have a history of displacement. So it's no secret that a lot of folks were displaced because of the storm. So reliving that again was pretty interesting. So a lot of folks who came from Vietnam were tight-knit. A lot of them were families that knew each other. So again, we moved back to the US and we created home again. We were one of the first communities to come back after Katrina. We kind of snuck our way back in. So a lot of folks rebuilt their homes without any running water or electricity because there's no place like home. Nothing out there is like the people you know, the people you grew up with, the people you struggled with. And they were willing to come back through all that devastation just to come back home. So when the city opened its doors to welcome folks back, they needed a place to put all of their devastation, their debris, their refrigerators. And during their big scheme and their big plan, New Orleans East wasn't thought of. They saw us as green space, quotations. And they just did an executive order and just basically bypassed any, they didn't observe anyone. They didn't check and see, oh, hey, there are folks living here. They know we live here. And they just went on ahead, dug a hole, put some cellophane wrap, and dumped all that garbage into our backyard. Not even a mile away, 0.8 to be exact. That's insane. That's obscene. And that happening to us, a lot of our elders in the community were like, what? No. But they couldn't translate that because there was a language barrier. And they looked to us as youth, the young folks in the community, to be the representatives. So we marched our way, made our way all the way to City Hall, knocked on their door and said, hey, we returned, we reclaimed, and we rebuilt. Why are you dumping on us? And the city's like, oh, I'm sorry, we'll stop for a second. You know how City Hall does it? For a second. And then 2-3 months later, they started dumping again. And that's when we had enough. And our community has like a history of being isolated away from everyone else and doing our own thing. And this was the first time we actually made some noise. And we're like, okay, we're not gonna take this sitting down. We're gonna hit you where it hurts. So we organized a protest, something that I had never done. I was like I was a teenager back when this was happening. I was like 14, 15. Yeah. And this was something I only read in history books, things that I read about the civil rights movement, like protest. Vietnamese and protest, come on. Never heard of that. And I just remember us organizing that in the morning of being in the bus with with the elders and the youth, and then just them saying, okay, they were ready. Our elders were freaking ready. Let me tell you how ready they were. They had a month's worth of medication in one pocket, and the other one, they had baggies of soy rice and Vietnamese bologna. They were ready. You know, they set up. They were like, and I just can't forget, like my grandpa included, them saying this, one of the elders, like, I'm gonna go to prison for this community. I'm gonna sacrifice everything for home. Because I'm tired. I'm tired of leaving. I'm tired of having something taken away from me. I want to sacrifice everything for you. And at that moment, we had a connection, that bond, like the redefining moment for myself changed in me from this meek teenager who was all about themselves to community. That they were handing us a torch, like this was their like last right or something. And that touched me on that bus that day. It was just that connection, you know? And we went out, we screamed our loudest, we said our chants, we charged those gates. We made sure from New Orleans East to City Hall's door that they were hearing us. We weren't gonna be this quiet little community that sits idly by. And we won. And from then, that changed me into a leader I am today. Because we returned, we reclaimed, we rebuild, but now we reform. We make changes. We see the inequalities and we combat them. Katrina has formed us into a stronger community. An idea of not just material things, but the whole idea that we're all family in some way. That we are going to fight and we're going to keep on fighting for the next 10 years, and we have. Because this city, this very city, that little piece of green space, will always be our home. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jose Alejandro Ayala. I'm from Honduras, but I live in New Orleans for a long time. So I'm feeling from here. I like everything, this city, so warm, you know, music and culture. When I moved to New Orleans, I have a degree for business expert. So I moved to New Orleans and I started growing my company. I started to buy some properties, and I make a crew, you know, to fix it up and rent it. And Katrina came, you know, how can I forget? It was my birthday, August 28, it was my birthday. My wife and I mean, she was the 26th, she was like, let's get out of here. Now, in that time, I have 3 kids, you know, and the kids, I mean, everybody's like, let's go. So I call my friends, you know, look, I mean, I'm not moving. I'm gonna stay here. You guys stay with me? They're like, sure, yeah, we're gonna stay, yeah, fine. So at 27, nobody answered the phone. They're gone. So my wife's like, what are you gonna do? Okay, let's go. So we left, you know, we left to Florida. And horrible traffic, you know, everybody know that. And then I spent my birthday like in a small, like a camping ground, you know, with my kids. we get a cake, you know, we did a little celebration. And that day, I shaved my hair. I used to have a long hair. I cut it. I said, I don't have time to stop worrying about my hair. So, and then we waiting, and we had some friends. So we moved to Jackson, stayed there, watched the news, and we watched the news and we're like, can't be happening. So my mother-in-law have a ranch in South Dakota. So we drove all the way to South Dakota. And I think in 5 minutes not gonna be enough time to tell everything because I remember like it was yesterday. One thing touched my heart, it was like, close to South Dakota, and the lady saw my license plates, and she was like, "You guys moved from there? How's everything there?" And I was like, "Yeah, we just left. We left, And she was like, "Can I give you $20 so that you guys can have for gas?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, it's like $20, I feel like if I say no, she's gonna get offended, so I put it in my pocket, put gas, and left. So we spent there like 3 weeks. I was so nervous, my business, I was here, I have some properties. Every single property was underwater, everyone, I have houses in uptown. So I was like, so worried, I pay some mortgages and everything, so call insurance. And so I told my wife, I'm gonna put my crew, and I'm back there, see what's going on. She was like, "Are you insane? You see, it's the whole, it's a war there, it's even water in the street. I don't care." So my sister, she was like, in that time, she was my supervisor, so we called some my employees, and we back to New Orleans. We made it to Baton Rouge, and we know they have a curfew. So I was like, let's go closer to see how we can get in. So people just trying to get out, we tried to get in, So it was like this, like a big line of trucks, with the Red Cross. So we squeezing in the line, and we made it to New Orleans, and I drove to Claiborne. I used to live in Audubon, right here. So it was so mud like this thick, and it was very difficult to get in. So, but as soon as I get to the house, I call my wife and like, "Look, I'm in the house." She was like, "Great, what are you gonna do?" "I don't know. They say curfew is coming like in 30 minutes. So, man, like this, I have like a big Homer with the guys, with guns, and like, "What are you guys doing here?" And like, "This is my house. Can you prove it?" "Yeah, I have my license here." So, "Okay, this is your other. What are you gonna do? You can sleep here?" I say, yes, I will sleep here. Yeah, so, and then, okay, curfew started in 45 minutes. So, open the door, Jesus. It was like, my house, it was 2 stories. So, but the whole first floor, it was like, that mark line. It was like a disaster, the smell. So, in that moment, I run up there, I put up plywood, and I stay with my crew in the house. That night, with like a little box of Doritos and a few drinks. My wife's like, "Well, what are you gonna do now?" I'm just like, I don't know, I'm here. And that night, it was terrifying. I hear shotgun. I hear like, it was like a war. Helicopter with light, all over. And I was like, that was not a good idea, stay here. So I camped in my own house. I put a tent inside my house, because there was mosquitoes all over. And then next day, it was like, impossible to move around. It was it was cows all over, water, the smell, it was horrible. Let me check if you already passed the 5 minutes, I don't know. So I need somebody to stop me when it's 5 minutes, okay? Stop? Okay. All right, guys. This is as a pleasure to talk about. That was just a little bit happened in my life, and Katrina helped the city some ways. Good things, bad things happen, but we're still here. We are survivors, and we're coming stronger than ever. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kawana Jasper. I'm an advocate for public and affordable housing. After Hurricane Katrina, I was displaced in Lafayette, Louisiana, then along to Houston, Texas. After being in Lafayette maybe 2 weeks without getting any assistance, after calling numerous 1-800 numbers, they said we couldn't receive any help because Louisiana was still in disaster mode. So I found one of my siblings and I went on to Houston, Texas. After being there, I was in a hotel for maybe like 2 nights, and the hotel manager wanted to kick out me and my family because we didn't have any funds to pay for the room. I was able to receive rental assistance to pay for those rooms from FEMA. But after looking at the bigger picture and coming back to the city of New Orleans, I said I have to do something, not just for myself, not just for my family, but other families as well who can't see what's really going on, that they don't want the people back in New Orleans, the people that helped build this city, which are the minorities. As I fought for public housing, affordable housing, I became a target. My family became a target. I'm 40 years old. I'm sorry, 41. I forget sometime. I guess that's old timers. I was just released from LTCW, which is Louisiana Transitional Center for Women. It's a prison system for women. I was railroaded, falsely accused of 2 counts of aggravated battery. I was sentenced to 2 4-year sentences ran concurrent by Judge Julian Parker. The detective that worked this case, he knew me, because in the process of me becoming an advocate for affordable housing, I was arrested numerous of times on bogus charges because I stood up to the oppressors. Whenever you stand against the oppressors, you will become a target. It's just something I said I had to do. If I don't stand for something, I'll fall for anything. And I wasn't falling for the BS that our elected city officials, HUD, and the national allies was trying to tell us. Katrina has changed my life in so many ways till I find myself, like the young man said, always in the back of my mind. But it's so bad to where I don't dream dreams like I used to dream. All my dreams are dark and clouded with water. Right now today, I'm 41 years old. I'm a convicted felon. I'm working part-time. And it's hard for me to understand, in a sense, how all this came about. But I understand that it's to quiet me, to silence me. Even though I'm free from LTCW, I'm still partially state property because I am on parole until March 2017. My first conviction, not even a misdemeanor, not a felon. Judge Julian Parker said he learned some things about Kawana Jasper as the trial went on. I had to take it to trial because even though I wasn't guilty of the crime they say I committed, you never know what you're going to get when you're facing a jury. So my attorney tried to give me a probation. The judge wouldn't even allow me to sign for a probation. He said he wanted me to do time, even before the trial started, before he heard any evidence. It was very clear to me what was going on the minute I stepped foot in the courtroom the day of my trial. They had a paper before me that stated another person that was with me that committed this crime, but I was the only one pursued. They never pursued this other person. I don't even know the person don't know me. That right there let me know that I was being railroaded. The detective that worked this case, he knew me from standing up against police brutality and corruption, because all that comes in play with affordable housing, police corruption, lack of education, lack of medical insurance, medical health. It's one circle. You see, right now today, housing is at a decline. Crime is on an increase. It don't take a genius to figure out what's going on. I never seen so many mentally unstable people before, but look what they're facing. When they move north to the North Shore, it was basically telling the people, we don't care what happened, because it was a good facility for people who couldn't afford to place their loved one in a facility to get the treatment that they need. And right now, there are so many resources out there for the people that the people can't get to. You have a lot of C3 nonprofit organizations that say they're there to help the people, but it's about money. New Orleans right now is just basically the land of opportunity. Our kids in New Orleans are being snatched out of the school system and being placed into the prison system, the school to prison pipeline. When you have the government who is more focusing on making sure a child at the age of 9 have a bed and OPP rather than a textbook, something is wrong. The schools, they're tearing the school buildings down and putting up nice school buildings. But what good is that building if you don't have a strong curriculum where our children could get a great education and go to any city and state and function on a normal level? It's very heartbreaking. I have 3 kids, a 19-year-old daughter. That's my 13-year-old daughter sitting right there. And I have a 9-year-old son. For 2.5 years, my kids came to see me. It was very heartbreaking. They didn't understand how mama could be in jail for something she didn't do. But they know, because they was part of this movement with me from 2007 up until today. And we're going to keep fighting this fight. I'm not going to let the oppressor stop me by any and all means necessary. I'm just so full talking about, I can't even prepare to write on this. It's very emotional and overwhelming. A lot of residents in the city of New Orleans wasn't aware, still not aware of what's going on with public and affordable housing. On December 20th, 2007, the New Orleans City Council gave the permit to tear down every public housing unit in New Orleans. All we asked for was 1-for-1 replacement of every affordable unit that they tore down to be replaced. That's why we have so many people at intersections with cardboard signs. I'm homeless, anything to help. We're the richest country in the world, but yet we're living like we're a third world country. It's embarrassing. My kids and I, we don't even stand for Pledge of Allegiance, national anthem. For what? to say I'm a person that live in a country like this is embarrassing. But like I said, I will continue my fight. I didn't spoke on this so many times, and like I told Rebecca that I know my time is up. We have to just stop listening and do something about it. If we don't, we just as guilty as the officials. If there's any way possible, if you could see someone that's in need, it may just be in there to listen, a shoulder to lean on, or just direct them to any resource they may need. I say thank you for them. Like I said, my name is Kawana Jasper, and the fight is not over for me. I will continue to fight. Thank you, and God bless you.
Hi, I'm Denali Lander. I'm going to start on August 25th, 2005. I was planting flowers and cleaning out a garden at Carter G. Woodson School in Central City. I had no context for what Central City was. I was with a bunch of other 18-year-olds very excited about their NOLA experience of their freshman year at Tulane. The next day we went to a preseason Saints game, had an awesome time. All of my stuff was already moved into Butler. The next day, my older brother and I we drove to Houston. He was also a Tulane student. So that was a Saturday. We drove to Houston. The next morning, our parents flew us home to Colorado. And we watched the storm and the flood that followed from the safety of our home in Colorado. So when I think about that week, I think about how easy it was for me to get to Houston, how on the turn of a dime, my parents were able to fly me to another state, and all my stuff was fine in Butler. And I made one phone call, and I got accepted into another great higher education institution, and my education was essentially uninterrupted. And I'll never understand why I was born into that level of privilege, but it has certainly, that week and my response to that disruption and my plan of what was going to be my great freshman year of college has certainly driven the last 10 years for me. And so that started that week. So I think a lot of people are undergrads currently, so I was there 10 years ago. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. It's very beautiful, if you've never been, but in my mind it's very bland. I was ready for something drastically different, and what I've loved living here the last 10 years are the people that I've met, and particularly the kids that I've met, and that started when I was at Tulane. So I tutored at Sci High, which is just down the road. I taught an after-school computer literacy program for high school kids, and I had one summer that was pretty pivotal for me, where I worked at a summer enrichment program called Breakthrough, which is for kids who go to public school, but it's actually housed at Newman. And then one semester, I was an AP tutor. So I tutored Altanisha, and I would work on AP Lit, and that spring she passed the test, and that was, so there's 76 AP tests that were taken that semester, so thousands of high school kids going to public school, and 76 public school, not even students, like 76 tests, AP tests came out of public schools that year. So that was really, during my undergrad years, that was really my first exposure to kind of the education scene in New Orleans. And I specifically remember sitting down with my academic advisor at Tulane and saying, I have a problem because all I want to do is be a teacher. Like, literally nothing else sounds interesting to me. And he gave, I was a English and history major, so the list of options was not, I hadn't really set myself up for a lot of career paths. But she said, then do that, then teach. And so I knew I wanted to teach here. So I hadn't studied education. So I applied for Teach for America. I'm trying to prove that not all Tulane students or Teach for America alums are transient. And trying to be authentic here. So I was placed in St. Bernard Parish. I worked at the alternative school there. So all of my students had been expelled from other schools. And when I think about when I was an undergrad, I was certainly becoming more aware of this achievement gap, what we call that in the education world. And when I was teaching in St. Bernard, became much more aware of just the complexities of how intertwined the achievement gap is with race and socioeconomics, and whether you've been expelled or not expelled, and your gender, and whether you go to a rural school or an urban school. And it just became very motivating for me to continue what I was doing. And I ended up teaching, the way the world works is crazy sometimes, but I ended up teaching at the charter school that took over Carter G. Woodson, where I did my NOLA experience garden planting. It's now a KIPP school, so I taught for 5 years, and I was always an English teacher. So in addition to like the achievement gap, I became obsessed with the literacy gap and just the differences that there are in this country between people's access to high quality education from the start, and how that affects all achievement and reading comprehension, all that. But when I was in my second year of teaching, a group of teachers and myself started running with kids after school, mostly because we had extra time, and our kids were asking about some after. Funny thing is, when you get expelled, they also take away all of your opportunity for after-school programs, which is probably the only reason why I got through high school, is because of all the other stuff I was doing besides school. Anyway, simple solution is we started running with kids. And there was one girl in particular named Casandra, who I was having a really hard time with in class, and things were going right there. So I thought, hey, you want to come to this running practice with me after school? So that was the very grassroots start of the nonprofit that I'm now the executive director of, called Youth Run NOLA. So I've run 5 Crescent City Classics with Casandra for the last 5 years. And I'm now much more aware of, in addition to how, zip code can impact your opportunity to have a high quality education or have, reading comprehension opportunities, all those gaps that I was aware of before. I'm now much more aware of health gaps, and really kind of kept awake at night by the idea that some people's life expectancy is totally dictated by where they grow up. And so what we do is we take a lot of the things that are so incredibly wonderful about New Orleans and people in New Orleans who care about each other and love each other, and they like to move and interact, and we just add distance running to it. So we get kids to train for 5Ks and 10Ks. And half marathons. And what's most upsetting to me, and kind of the disaster that I think about now, is like we talk to all the kids, and over 70% of the kids in Youth Run NOLA say they don't feel safe running in their neighborhood. So it's like I'm trying to get kids all into this activity, and they're setting goals and taking total ownership over their health, yet there's still they don't have the opportunity there. There's a problem there if they're not feeling safe where they should be able to, have this free opportunity and free exercise. So that's what keeps me going. That's what I'm doing here. And that's, I've met the most incredible people, and particularly the most incredible kids. And because of that, I have deep optimism about where the city will go in their hands in the future. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me, Rebecca and Andy. My name is Ann Rolfus, and I am the director of an organization called the Louisiana Bucket Brigade. And what I do every day is work with people who live next to oil refineries and chemical plants and some sort of oil pollution. And the mission of the organization and my life mission is to end oil pollution. That's the small goal, to end oil pollution in this state. And then the bigger goal is to get off the crack of fossil fuels, right? The word fossil is in there for a reason, because it should stay in the ground. And so before Katrina, I was working in a neighborhood in St. Bernard Parish that we've heard of a little bit tonight, not too far from here. It's called Chalmette Vista. And the person that I was working with is a man named Ken Ford, who had started a group called the St. Bernard Citizens for Environmental Quality. And he had a great group of people, about 60 active members, and our goal was to stop the pollution coming from the ExxonMobil refinery that was actually just across the street from his house. So in addition to the health problems that the refinery caused him, he had lost a lung because of pollution. He also wasn't able to have his grandchildren over to play in the backyard, because in the mornings he would wake up and his house was covered with soot from the refinery. He was embarrassed to have people over, because they would come over and say, "Oh, what's that bad smell? It smells weird." And that was sulfur, right, coming from the refinery. And so the refinery posed Ken Ford and his neighbors a lot of problems. And we had all sorts of tactics to go after the refinery. Of course, right before Katrina, we were really hitting our stride. We had gotten an editorial in the New York Times about the refinery, and a judge, Judge Sarah Vance, had actually ruled against the refinery in a lawsuit we had brought. She had ruled that they violated the Clean Air Act over 2,500 times, right, through their accidents. So this refinery was a problem, but we were helping to show it for what it was. So on the Saturday before Katrina, I called Ken, and he didn't pick up, and I said, left a message saying, "Oh, I think you must already be evacuated. See you Monday." Well, of course, I didn't see him Monday. The next time I saw Ken Ford and his wife Genevieve was a month later in St. Bernard Parish, at their house. For those of you who don't know, St. Bernard Parish was completely destroyed. Water went above the roofs of the houses. And I saw hay everywhere. And I asked Ken, "What is that hay? Why is there hay everywhere?" And he said, "Ann, that's not hay. That's marsh grass." The parish, like where Monique lives, is so close to our wetland protection that it actually got pulled into the parish. So there was hay, but there was also something else. There was oil. 1 million gallons of oil were spilled by Murphy Oil in St. Bernard Parish during Hurricane Katrina. And it's what you don't hear of about Katrina. You don't hear about that there was the largest land-based spill in the world in St. Bernard Parish. And furthermore, that people moved back atop that oil. Obviously, that's a dangerous situation. Children are being reared there now. Who knows what'll happen to them. Since Katrina, all the refineries in the state, 17 of them, not just the one in the two in St. Bernard, have had 4,000 accidents, according to their own reports. 4,000 accidents. So you know they've had a lot more. That's their own self-reported information. But the good news about what I'm saying about all these accidents is that, and all the pollution and the 1 million gallons, is that that's actually the good news in terms of the oil industry. That's the happy stuff, because I guess we can live with pollution or somehow survive, because the real problem with the oil industry, and again, Monique alluded to it, is that they have destroyed our wetland protection. Louisiana and this part of the world is supposed to be safe from storms because over 7,000 years we built up marshes and swamps that protected us. And yet, in a span of 85 years, I'm going to throw out a lot of numbers here, but in a span of 85 years, so as old as maybe your grandfather or grandmother, the oil industry dug 10,000 miles of canals and pipelines through our wetlands. So all these things after Katrina, the wonderful work for affordable housing or for better schools or our music, none of it's going to mean anything, because we're not going to be here because we have no wetlands. The obvious solution to this is that very rich company, a very rich industry like the oil industry, ought to be paying for rebuilding these wetlands. It's a no-brainer. ExxonMobil makes $40 billion year after year. That conversation isn't on the table. 10 years after Katrina, our elected officials will not bring the oil industry to the table to pay for the damages that they've caused this state, pollution and wetlands. And what's more, they prevent other people from bringing it to task. But there's some good news here. The national movement to get off of fossil fuels is strong, and y'all might have noticed that Obama just canceled Keystone. That was good news. And so 10 years after Katrina, it's a pretty gloomy picture in regard to getting some sort of accountability for the oil industry. But in year 11, on March 23rd, 2016, I think it's a Wednesday, come to the Superdome, because there is going to be yet another auction of the Gulf of Mexico to the highest bidder. But we're going to be there to say no. To say that people power, like it stopped Keystone, is going to encircle that Superdome and prevent any more drilling in our Gulf of Mexico, is going to turn the tide on the oil companies and say, in fact, we've got to stop this pollution. We need to put windmills instead of the oil rigs, and we need to stop their accidents and make fossil fuels what they ought to be, which is fossil fuels that remain in the ground. 10 years after Katrina has been worrisome and woeful, but 11 years after Katrina, now that will be something different. Thank y'all.
Good evening. My name is Kirsta Kurtzberg, and I'm a physician who lives and works in New Orleans, and I was a physician at Charity Hospital in New Orleans at the time of Katrina. I was taking care of 18 patients on the 5th floor. And I just want to give you a few historical facts. Charity Hospital was founded in 1736 with the mission of providing medical care to those who could not afford it, and which made it, at the time of Katrina, the second oldest public hospital in the country behind Bellevue in New York. A couple of other facts. At the time of the storm, we had approximately 1,200 people in the building. About half of those people were patients, and the other half were staff and family members of patients at the hospital. We actually didn't have very much damage from Hurricane Katrina. We did very well in terms of the structural content of the building from the storm. However, the levee breach itself quickly became a problem for us at the hospital. We were surrounded by several feet of water, and the water came into the basement and the first floor of the hospital, which meant that things changed dramatically for us. Within the first 24 hours, we lost power, we lost running water, and we lost backup power because the generators were in the basement. So things were very different than we had ever seen before, and we were in that situation for 6 days until we were evacuated on September 2nd. So that was an unusual week for us at Charity Hospital. We were practicing medicine in a way that we had never been trained to practice medicine before. We had no dialysis machines, no labs, no x-rays, no way to ventilate patients mechanically, so patients had to be hand ventilated by staff at the hospital in shifts for 6 days. We also did not, during that period of time, we did not receive any supplies from governmental agencies or non-governmental agencies outside the hospital. We didn't receive a bottle of water, a can of food, a battery, a flashlight. So we were literally an island unto ourselves at the hospital. And miraculously, our patients survived. We survived that experience, and we were evacuated on September 2nd by Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, whom we affectionately call the Cajun Navy. Those guys totally rock. And came and evacuated our patients first, and then the staff by boat. And when we left the hospital on that day, those of us who worked there, a lot of the staff who'd worked there for many, many years, we really believed, probably very naively, that we would be back inside the hospital and be back inside treating patients within a number of weeks, which did not occur. Charity Hospital did not reopen and never reopened after Katrina. So that long legacy from 1736 to 2005 ended at that point. And why Charity Hospital didn't reopen is a long story. I'm happy to talk to you about it, probably more than you want to know after this. But it's a long story. It's a complicated story. I encourage you, if you're interested, there's a wonderful documentary called Big Charity, which really outlines some of the political struggle to reopen the hospital. But suffice it to say, there were many people on one side, mostly healthcare workers like myself, that felt that we could remediate the building and be back in and be servicing patients rapidly. And there were other forces, other people, mainly politicians and administration, that felt that this was a good time to garner funds to build a new hospital. So they won. The new hospital was built, and it opened this year in August, almost 10 years after Katrina, almost to the day. And I really just want to acknowledge, when we're looking back at this 10-year point, that what happened during that 10 years in healthcare in New Orleans is profound. There were transitional clinics, there were temporary clinics, there were some available hospital beds at University Hospital during this time. So it was not that there were no available services for public access to healthcare, but they were extremely limited compared to what Charity was offering before. Before the storm, there were 1 million patient visits a year at Charity Hospital. And so what we have been working with in the last 10 years is a very bare bones, pared down version of that. And I think it's really important to know that that loss of Charity Hospital has affected the health of New Orleanians profoundly. I'm very confident in saying that people died as a result of Charity Hospital being closed. We don't know how many people. It's very difficult to study from an epidemiologic standpoint. We don't know their names. But I can assure you as a physician that the lack of access to health care over the last 10 years has led to a substantial number of people suffering from disease, disability, and death, in fact, death. And that these are really, I think it's important to acknowledge that these are victims of Katrina. They didn't die in a rooftop, they didn't die in an attic, they didn't die from drowning, but these are people that are really victims of the disaster and of the response to the disaster and of choices that were made in the rebuilding of the city. So I think I just wanted to acknowledge that today. And I also wanted to say, in any disaster, there are people that are acknowledged for their work and people that are not acknowledged for their work. And at 10 years, one thing that really strikes me is that it is such a massive effort in the face of a disaster. And in just your small place, for us, it was just our hospital. But that people rise to that occasion and do things that are so profound. And I'm not talking about the doctors and nurses who have gotten a lot of accolades over the years, but I'm really thinking about the hospital staff that allowed us to do our job, allowed us to take care of our patients. There were so many people that were never acknowledged. The food service workers that took limited resources, had to ration food, had to ration water, and prepared food for patients 3 times a day, 3 meals a day, ran up and down 13 flights of stairs in order to keep patients and keep staff healthy during that period of time. The custodial staff, the security guards, who did everything from fixing a gas leak to fixing a water leak to helping carry patients down the stairs when it was time to evacuate. I just want to acknowledge that because I really feel like that they're the unsung heroes for us and our story at Charity Hospital. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kalamu Yasalam. I'm an educator and writer, professional writer. Just want to, in reflecting and listening, there's 3 points I want to deal with. Number one, the majority and certainly the most destructive aspects of the flooding of New Orleans and St. Bernard. We need to include St. Bernard whenever we talk about New Orleans. Was because of the business interests in New Orleans that demanded that Congress build Mr. Go, the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet. That's the major responsibility. There was no levee that broke in New Orleans East. Yet the majority of New Orleans East was flooded. There was no levee that broke in St. Bernard Parish. That parish was flooded. That was Mr. Go. They did it because they said, they built the canal because they said it would save 80-some nautical miles and blah, 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 and so forth and so on. And it destroyed. It destroyed us. I grew up in the lower Ninth Ward. We used to go in the wetlands, cross the tracks, cross the canal, which was like 2 blocks from my house, hunting, fishing, and playing. And about 2 years ago, my brother said, "Man, you got to come see this." And we went back there, and there's a water treatment plant back there right on the border of Orleans and St. Bernard Parish. I grew up 2.5 blocks from that border. And when we climbed the levee, crossed the tracks, climbed the levee, and you looked out, and it was desolation. A couple of tree stumps sticking up out of the water. This used to be swampland, teeming with flora and wildlife and what have you. I stood there and I almost cried. I mean, unless you see, most people have never been there, so they don't know what they're missing. But once you see it, so Mr. Go, Mississippi River Gulf Outlet, built on behalf of the business interests who went to Congress and got a provision to have it built with no thought whatsoever about what it would do to the landscape and no provisions whatsoever should there be a flood. That's one. And that should never be forgotten when we talk about what happened. Yes, there was a breach of the levees, and yes, that had a profound impact. But we would not be in the situation we were in if that Mississippi River Gulf Outlet had not been built. And that's the bottom line of much of the history of the United States, and particularly here in New Orleans. Business interests can do things, profoundly changing the thing, and nobody ever holds them accountable. They talk about the Army Corps of Engineers, but who told the Army Corps of Engineers to do it? Who passed the laws that allowed them to do it and funded them to do it? 2, we hate politicians, and we often have good reason to hate politicians. And those of us that don't hate politicians are politicians. The fact of the matter is, our politicians are in the pockets of the business interests. And I go back to what I said about the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet. We were failed by politicians. And those politicians who did attempt to do something about it either were turned out of office, right, or succumbed to corruption themselves. I can call names. I have friends. And it gets to the point where we become mentally disturbed by the voting process in the United States of America. We do it because we believe in democracy, but we hate the outcome of doing it. And if I'm lying, somebody tell me I'm not telling the truth about you. Are you satisfied with what you've got as a result of participating in the democratic process? 3, that keep in mind the politicians, because that's the window dressing, the tinsel on the Christmas trees. Mr. Go, the politicians. And the third is the attempt to change, profoundly change, the demographics and the political and social climate of New Orleans. You can look at our panel, and as much as I learned, and I learned a lot listening to each of you tonight, and I want to thank you for sharing the information, but does that panel reflect the demographics of New Orleans? Think about it. Does the panel, do we reflect the demographics of New Orleans? And people pass that off, oh, well, you know, you had some good panelists, they were all concerned people, and so does it reflect the demographics of New Orleans? Because what is happening is that poor black people are thrown away every day. 100,000 are not back here. And that would be all right if we were talking about 100,000 not back in Cheyenne or Boise or what have you. You can say, well, they've moved on. New Orleans, in case most people don't know, of all the major cities of the United States, New Orleans had the largest nativist population of any major city in the United States. That is, people who were born, lived, and died in the same place. The largest nativist population. And when you can take 100,000, which was a little bit less than a quarter of the population at the time, take 100,000 of those people, many of whom had never even left the city in their lives, and relocate them and not bring them back. You got to remember, most of those people who were sent away by the government knew where they were. The government had their damn address. If they wanted people to rebuild the city, those folk would have come back and rebuilt the city. I know they brought in teachers from the Philippines. Hear me, from the Philippines to work here in New Orleans. And the government, federal government, gave the state of Louisiana the money to make sure that there were teachers here. And they gave it to all of the areas affected by Katrina. In New Orleans, a decision was made to fire the teachers and start all over. So this third point is that with 100,000 black folk gone, with the destruction of the teachers, who were all college educated, by the way. You couldn't even get to be a teacher if you weren't college educated. You wipe out the college educated, you take 100,000, and what do you have left? What you have left includes, for those of us who studied Marxism, the lumpen proletariat, the criminal element, the thugs, quote unquote. We are suffering right now from a crime wave that is unprecedented and undercounted. Half the time, you don't even call the police no more if somebody breaks into your car. So waste the goddamn time to call them. And what we have is a community which is bordering on the psychotic, because many of the young people never received any kind of counseling or therapy as a result of being displaced, and now the youth are turning on the community. We know this. You here at Tulane know this. You've had recent incidents. These don't happen by accident. And these are not just one or two individuals. This represents a profound breakdown of mental health in this community. A profound breakdown. And going back to those politicians, they made a decision to close charity. They made a decision to close charity. How in the world do you